Nobody&Co.
Hello everyone, my name is Anusha and welcome to my channel Nobody&Co. 안녕하세요 여러분, 저는 Anusha입니다. 오늘은 제가 한국어 공부를 어떻게 혼자 했는지 좀 알려드릴게요. Don't worry, the rest of the video is gonna be in English. I just wanted to share with you a little tidbit of Korean to show you what level of Korean I'm at currently. I would say I'm close to like an equivalent to the third year college level. That's where I'm at with my Korean right now. So today I'm going to be sharing with you how I learned Korean all by myself, and you can too, and with nothing but free resources on the internet to guide you. And at the end of this video, I'm going to be sharing some of my favorite resources for learning Korean. And guys, these resources are so underrated. I have not seen these resources mentioned by anyone else in any other video about learning Korean. And trust me, I've seen a lot of videos about learning Korean. So yeah, stay tuned for those tips at the end of the video. But before that, I'm just going to be sharing with you why I started learning Korean, why I continued learning Korean. And then I'm going to be sharing with you actually some similarities between Korean and Indian languages, because chances are if you're watching this video, you're probably from India. And then finally, I'm going to be sharing some tips for absolute beginners. If you want to start learning Korean, if you don't know where to get started, I'll be sharing some tips for you. And then I will be sharing some tips for intermediate learners. People who probably started learning Korean but have hit a point where they don't know where to go from here. I was in your situation probably 6 months or a year ago. So don't worry, I have a lot of tips for people who are like that. And then finally at the end, I'll share my favorite underrated resources with you guys. So let's begin with why I started learning Korean. Guys, let's address the elephant in the room, the elephant in the YouTube video. Yes, I am a fan of BTS, and I did start learning Korean partly because of BTS. Basically, I wanted to understand what the members of BTS were saying in their interviews and in their, live streams and stuff like that without having to read the subtitles. That is half of the reason why I started learning. The other half of the reason is that I was actually looking for a new language to learn at the time. This was 2017. At that time, I was actually learning German all by myself. I was using Duolingo to learn German. I wanted to explore new languages that I was not that familiar with. That is when I discovered BTS and I was like, Korean, not a bad language to start learning. But oh my gosh, once I started learning, you guys, very, very quickly, it became about much more than just BTS or K-pop or K-dramas or anything. I fell in love completely with the actual Korean language itself. There's so many little things about the Korean language, little subtleties of the language, of how it's spoken, of the phrases that are used, that I find very endearing and joyful and close to home actually. Korean started to feel like a language that was not at all foreign, that felt like it was very close to home for me, even though it's not. Korea is very far away from India geographically, but the Korean language felt very, very close to my heart. But the surprising part though was how similar some Indian languages are with the Korean language. When I started learning Korean, I was in Hyderabad. Hyderabad is a city in Telangana, which is in the south of India. And in Hyderabad, people speak a language called Telugu, okay? I remember I was in my classroom and I overheard two of my friends talking in Telugu amongst themselves, and I wasn't really paying attention to them, so it sounded like they were speaking in Korean. I'm not gonna lie, it sounded exactly like Korean. Then I noticed that there's some words that are the exact same in both Korean and Telugu. For example, and this is a bad word, you guys, but your mom in Telugu is Niamma, and it is the same in Korean. It's Niomma in Korean as well. And that's just two words, but there's actually many, many words that are the same in Korean and in South Indian languages. Basically, all the South Indian languages, Telugu, Kannada, Malayalam, Tamil, they all belong to a family called Indo-Dravidian languages. And there is actual research published and a whole Wikipedia page about the similarities between Korean and Indo-Dravidian languages. When I discovered this in the classroom, I didn't know that actual research exists about this, But then when I googled it, to my surprise, I came across the Wikipedia page, and turns out there's like more than 1,000 words that are the same in Korean and Tamil. To me, it was like a sign that I'm on the right path to keep learning this language. I noticed some similarities between Korean and the language that my family speaks at home, which is called Maithili. Now, Maithili is a language that's spoken in the north of Bihar and in Nepal as well. And there are some surprising similarities in Maithili and Korean as well. Dun, like if you add dun to the end of a word, like in Korean, there's like onjetun, odidun, nugudun. There's the same dun in Maithili as well. Like my grandmom, she keeps saying kaha dun jate rehte, which means like kaha dun is like wherever, and there's odidun in Korean, which is also wherever. And then there's a phrase called Yaupi in Korean, which is like fox rain. It's actually a very entertaining story about when it rains suddenly, when it's sunny outside. There's some kind of myth about like a fox getting married and clouds crying or something. And that same story exists in Maithili as well. I know a lot of people who are like Bengali and Oriya and a lot of northeastern languages as well have a lot of similarities with Korean. And I think that is the reason why so many people in India are intrigued by Korean, by K-dramas, by K-pop and all of that. Because somehow, somewhere, it feels like a language and like a culture that is very, very familiar to us. Before we get into some tips for beginners and for intermediate learners, I want to talk about how my Korean learning journey has looked so far. In 2017, I started with Duolingo. I kept learning on and off till 2018, 2019. 2019 to 2020, I actually took a long break from learning Korean because I had college, it was my first year, I had a lot of other things to focus on. But then in 2020, after the pandemic hit, I was like, what? I don't have anything to do now. And so I spent the entire summer of 2020 just polishing my Korean level. I took Duolingo more seriously than ever. I learned how to type Korean on a keyboard and I started reading, and I took the topic 1 mock test, like a practice exam online in 2020, and I got like level 2 topic, which is like the highest level that you can get from the topic 1. Finally in 2021, I stopped learning it by myself and started learning at university from an actual Korean professor. It was so much fun, you guys, and I got an A+ in the class. This class that I took was a Korean 2000 level class, so basically a second year class. So what I'm trying to say is that I learned 1 year's worth of Korean, 1 college year's worth of Korean I learned by myself from free resources on the internet. So yeah, that is what my Korean journey has been up till now. Alright, now let's finally talk about some tips for beginners. The first thing I think when starting to learn any new language is to look for official resources to learn from physically, like around you in the area that you live. Learning Korean on your own is it's in many ways it's a more difficult and energy consuming process than learning it from someone who has a structure in place for you. And not only that, it can get a little bit lonely at times when you're learning it by yourself. So if you have classmates and friends to learn along with you, that's always a better option than learning alone. If there are any official cultural centers, like there's a Korean cultural center in Delhi, there's one in Hyderabad as well. There's a lot of universities across India that have Korean learning courses. Also, Korean is probably taught in some schools as well. So try to find if your school is one of them. And after all of that, if you don't find anything around you that will teach you Korean, then welcome to the internet. There are more than enough resources here to help you. So let's get started with them. So the first thing I would say is learn the alphabet. Learn Hangul. Please do not think that it is a good idea to start learning Korean without knowing the Korean alphabet. And good news, the Korean alphabet is very, very easy to learn. It'll probably take you like a day or 2 max to learn them. Duolingo is a great place to learn Hangul. In fact, if you start the Duolingo course, the first thing that they teach you is the alphabet, naturally. So go and learn the alphabet. Go! And then I would say stick to Duolingo for the first few months at least of learning Korean. Duolingo is more than enough. Duolingo gets a bad rep. People say it's not accurate, people say it's not helpful, but that only happens when you don't take it seriously. What happens with Duolingo is it's an app, people take it easy, they learn on Duolingo for 2 minutes one day and then they forget about it for 6 months. Don't do that. Stick to a routine with Duolingo. And Duolingo does a really great job of keeping you on track. They tell you how many days in a row you've been learning. They have leaderboards, so if you learn a lot, you can get on top of the leaderboard and stuff. So set a daily quota and work towards finishing that daily quota every single day. After breakfast every day in the morning is the time where I would sit on my laptop and keep learning Korean on Duolingo until I was done with my daily quota. Another thing with Duolingo is you can learn it on your phone or on your laptop, but I would suggest your laptop or a PC, something with a keyboard that you can physically type on, because then you'll be able to type in Korean instead of you can actually select words like buttons where there are words, or you can type the words by yourself. So I would suggest type the words by yourself instead of depending on the buttons to do that, because if you type the words yourself, you'll be learning more and you'll be learning more quickly as well. Another great and very popular resource is Talk to Me in Korean. They have a website, they have books, they have a YouTube channel, they even have podcasts on Spotify and all other podcast platforms. I unfortunately discovered Talk to Me in Korean very, very late in my Korean learning journey. But I am telling you now, so if you're a beginner, you can make use of both Duolingo and TTMIK basically. TTMIK, their courses are paid sometimes. I think most of their courses are paid, but their YouTube channel is free and their podcasts are also free for the most part. So depending on whether or not you want to spend money on your Korean learning journey, you can decide whether or not you want to use Talk to Me in Korean. But if you want to go completely free 100%, Duolingo is the best app out there, guys. So yeah, Duolingo should keep you busy for a long, long time. Try to finish every single course they have, and every single module that they have, there are 5 levels. So I would suggest go through the whole thing once, so you reach level 1 on all the modules, and then go through them 4 more times, so everything gets memorized. It's perfect, you guys. And then there'll be times in your journey where you come across a new word, maybe in a drama, maybe in a video somewhere, and you want to know the meaning behind the word. For that, do not use Google Translate. Use Naver Papago. It is an AI-based translation app. It is probably the better one. Google Translate, see, the problem with these translation apps is that they don't tell you what the level of formality should be. So if you're trying to message your favorite K-pop idol or something like that, what happens if you Google Translate that sentence, you can say, "You are cool, I love you." It will probably say something like, "당신은 멋있습니다. 당신을 사랑합니다." That's not the right way to say it. That's way too formal and no one speaks like that. It's not natural. So I would say whether or not you're using Google Translate or whether you're using Papago, just be a little bit careful about the level of formality. I know on Papago there's a option where you can choose the formal sentence ending or the normal sentence ending. So formal or normal. And then also use the Naver dictionary. The Naver dictionary is really good if you want to search up how a word is used in a sentence. And the last tip I have for beginners, this is about how to get better at speaking Korean naturally like a native Korean speaker. Listen to Korean 24/7. Expose your ears to the Korean language as often as you can. And this is the easiest tip that I'm gonna give you guys, because chances are that if you want to learn Korean, there's probably already something or many things about Korea that you enjoy, and so you should probably not have a very hard time finding Korean videos to watch. Think about this, when we were babies, right, and we didn't know how to speak, we would be in our homes and we would be listening to our mother tongue 24/7. It would be going into our ears, and then naturally after a year or two we would start speaking the language. That's how we learned our first language ever, and that is the most natural way to get really good at speaking a language naturally. I realized that when I read a new word, usually I don't start using it until much later. But when I hear a new word, I can use it automatically, very, very quickly. People who watch K-dramas are probably aware of this. When you're hearing words like 진짜 or like 사랑해요, you start saying it so naturally without knowing the spelling of that word, without knowing the meaning of that word. You just start saying it. And that's the power of listening to a language instead of just reading a language. Find musical artists that you like who sing in Korean, find K-dramas, find podcasts in Korean. Talk to Me in Korean has a lot of those. And I also found that Korean cooking videos are really fun to watch, especially when you start to know some words here and there in the Korean language. You should start watching Korean cooking videos. They are really fun. Listening to Korean 24/7 helped me understand what sounds natural and what sounds unnatural. Sometimes when you form a new sentence by yourself in Korean, you speak it out loud and something about it just sounds strange. It doesn't sound right, even though grammatically it may be perfectly correct. And that is because something about the pronunciation is not right or the intonation is not right. So when you listen to Korean, all of that comes very naturally to you. And then when I speak in Korean, I can compare and contrast that with how a native Korean speaker sounds. And then I can figure out what is different and how I can get to a native Korean speaking level. I got a lot of DMs that said that I started learning Korean, but after 2 to 3 days I got unmotivated to learn Korean and I gave up on it. That is going to happen. It is natural because when you start, there's a huge learning curve. It feels like you're never going to get good at it. But if you keep watching things that you love in Korean, it'll give you the motivation, like, you know what, no, I want to understand this video without subtitles, so I'm gonna keep learning even though it feels like I won't get anywhere. So watching Korean content and listening to Korean content will keep you motivated and it'll make sure that you don't stop after 2 to 3 days. Also, the more Korean you learn, the more videos you'll have that you can watch in Korean without subtitles, and the more videos you watch in Korean, the more Korean you'll learn. It's a beautiful cycle that keeps giving. It's a gift that keeps giving, you guys. Alright, those are my tips for beginners. Now, once you have crossed the beginner level, once you've learned a little bit of Korean, you know Hangul, you're comfortable with it, but there's still a lot of things about Korean that you don't understand, you're gonna go like, what now? What do I do? Where do I go from here? There's a point that you cross after which you feel like there's nothing on the internet to help you now. But that just means that you have reached an intermediate learning level, and don't worry, there's still a lot of resources on the internet to help you. So next up, let me share my favorite tips for intermediate Korean learners. If you have any further questions, please comment down below and let me know what those questions are. If there's anything that was not clear to you from my video, then I can elaborate on it in the comments. Just let me know and I will do that for you. And as always, like this video if you want to, subscribe to my channel if you want to, and keep supporting Nobody&Co if you want to. But if you don't want to, don't do anything. Bye.
Can I be my witness? Let me really